Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Evolving HR live session. I've just noticed already that somebody in the chat seems to have logged in as me because it's I don't really understand.
You didn't expect that at the beginning, did you?
It's Amy, but it's come up as Kirsty Baggs-Morgan. I hope I haven't. I've done this before. I've sent my link out to everybody, so then you'll have multiple Kirsty Baggs-Morgans in the chat.
That would be hilarious, by the way.
Oh, God.
The world doesn't have enough.
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
we need Kirsty for president.
Okay, so, well, thank you, people in the chat, for saying what your name actually is, because it looks like I've sent you my link, and so you are all logged in as me. Brilliant.
You're going to go, Kirsty Baggs-Morgan, you've got a question. Let us know.
This means that for those of you in the chat, you can say what you want, and you can be as rude as you want, because everybody's going to think it's me. So,
what a
I
way
don't
to
quite
break
know
the
how I've done this.
Amazing.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, so I was just saying to the panel before we went live that this is a topic that Sam and I have been talking about running a session on for probably 2 years now. We finally got around to it. So this session is designed to cover as much as we can around international HR and the kind of pitfalls and benefits. So I've got a pretty awesome panel today of people who have a lot of experience in dealing with HR in, multiple different geographies. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they will probably tell you who they are and what they do better than I can. So I'm going to just go around as you are on my screen. So Gary, do you want to go first and just introduce yourself?
Thank you, Kirsty. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm Gary. I am 20 years plus in the leadership game. I'm an executive leadership coach and a leadership consultant and founder of Sana Executive Coaching Consulting. Nice to invite me and be here. Thank you.
And where are you based?
I'm based in Berlin.
And what international experience have you covered? Because you were an HR professional before you went out on your own, weren't you?
Yeah. So I have a retail leadership background, and then I did a career change into HR in 2013, I want to say. So I've worked mostly for global companies. I'm a Londoner originally, so I get the context of having teams that are dispersed across different geographies. And I have one horror story to share later that we'll come to and we'll be able to unpack. But yeah, I have strong feelings on this topic, and I'm hoping there's many people we can help out there today.
Brilliant. Love it. Thank you so much for joining us. Sam, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. So first of all, I'm really excited to be part of this panel. I think it's a cool subject and a cool panel. I'm Sam Barnes. I'm the co-founder and sales director of a company called Agility EOR. So we're a global employer of record. I've spent the past decade helping businesses find the right way to employ in foreign jurisdictions. So I've done a lot of entity setup work, EORs, PEOs, all of those kind of things. I'm based in the UK, close to Oxford.
Brilliant. Marion, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi. Good morning for me because it's 6 a.m. in Northwest Arkansas. So yeah, I'm in the US. Obviously, this is not an Arkansas accent. This is a Glasgow accent. But I do a bunch of things. I'm founder of the Fearless PX. We're a small boutique consultancy focused around my area of research, which is psychological safety. I'm doing a PhD, at Glasgow Cali in Glasgow right now. I'm just finishing that off. Host a podcast called The Elephant in the Org, where we talk about things that are not psychologically safe and how you can kind of, win the day with that stuff. And I also currently work in an HR adjacent role, actually. I stepped into a sort of people analytics insights role, and I work for one of the largest, in fact, the largest retailer in the world, which you can probably guess who that is because it's in Northwest Arkansas. But yeah, and I've lived all over the place and I've got a lot of war stories.
Yeah.
And Alex, how about you?
Thanks, Kirsty. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Astaire. I'm the Global HR Director for ICG Medical, which is a healthcare, social care and life sciences solutions partner, which operates over 13 countries. I guess in the context of today's webinar, I'm a fellow of the CIPD and also of the Learning Performance Institute, amongst other organisations. I also sit within the Global Advisory Board for Kennedy University within the United States and co-run HR UK, a network of over 24,000 UK HR professionals. I think a credential, though, that's most important to today's discussion is probably the simplest one, actually, is that I do this work across borders every single day of the week.
Gosh, I'm excited. This is a hell of a panel. There's a hell of a lot of experience on this panel today, so I'm excited. So let me get stuck into the questions then. So for people who haven't navigated international HR before, what is something you wish somebody had told you before you first had to navigate that? So something that would have saved you some pain early on. Alex, I'm going to start with you on that one.
Oh, thank you. So I think for me, it's, well, I mean, there's lots that you could focus on. I think probably one of the most important things that someone would have told me earlier on was that we stop treating, within HR, the royal we, for those of you on the call, that we stop treating the home country as the default. I think that when you start in human resources or in any organization, you carry this mental template with you. And I think that for most of us in the room, that template is the UK and the US. And I think the instinct is to build on everything from that template and then almost like a quilt, patch that together and patch the edges around for different countries. But actually that instinct is completely wrong. Every country is its own default. For example, in my context, India is not the UK with adjustments. Japan is not the US with adjustments. I think the moment that as professionals, we treat one country as the master copy, if you will, you've kind of already built this thing in your mind that will either fail an audit on its own or cause you some significant issues legally a few years later. So I think the lesson is simple. Well, it's simple to say, but hard to live, which is there is no home country. In my own context, there are 13 home countries, and it's my responsibility to ensure that as an organisation, we build for each one as if it was the only one.
Mm-hmm. That's so well put. So well put. Sam, what about you? What would you add to that?
Yeah, I think Alex is right. I think starting from scratch when we go into a new country, and of course the basics are always understand how different things can be, understand how much time it's going to take to go into the new country, and also the interconnectedness, if I may well have made up a new word, but how connected things are when we go and do these things. So well, we've got to establish an entity. Well, that's great, but you're going to need a registered office address to do that. Okay, well, I'll get one of those then. Yeah, well, great, but you're going to need a resident director. Right, well, I'll get one of those. So it's that kind of, it's understanding the chain and the order of play, I think is important, would save pain if you knew that in advance.
Brilliant, thank you. Marion, how about you?
Oh, I mean, building on that, I think it's just realising that how we do things at home is literally not how anywhere else does things. And I think US employment law is a great example of that. And we grow up watching American TV and we see, you know, whoever, Donald Trump, whoever going, you're fired. And actually, you can't do that. It's against the law. It will does not mean it will. And so I think that we get so kind of coloured by what we see on TV and in movies. We struggle to separate that from the reality. So the biggest lesson is partner up, get yourself a good EOR partner or a good local representation because you're damn well going to need it.
Yeah.
Gary, what would you add?
Well, I wish someone had told me, well, you know, I've worn many hats. I'm a former vice president of people. And what I would say that I learned that I wish somebody had told me is that international HR is not just a technical topic. It's a people experience topic. And, you know, the technical side and the compliance side is day-to-day business as usual. You just need to get that foundation solid and correct. But then the flip side of it is, what's the consequence of trying to wing it? What's the consequence of trying to just adapt UK law a bit for someone who's in South America, for example? You know, I've led teams in APAC, South America, US, and EU as well. And the experience for them is pretty shitty, excuse my language. And I think it really requires us to be intentional and know that this is one of those moments that matter, where you can really keep people engaged and on board for the journey. So my take is, it's not just a technical topic. We really need to think about the people experience.
Yeah, I mean, I know I said I wasn't going to chip in with my own experience, but I can't help myself. I think for me in my HR career, like, the cultural differences were as important as the legal differences and the process differences and the kind of environment and structure that you're working in. And certainly most of the biggest issues I faced were when something culturally was completely different from, you know, what it's that the mistake that the thing that Alex talked about is a mistake that I saw again and again and again. It's like, we're starting, like, everything in the US is the base point and everything else is wrong or so different that we can't get our heads around it. And so that I wish that I had rethought it from a different perspective, but it was always the cultural issues that caused the biggest nightmares for me. I have to be honest. Sam, we've already, EOR and PEO have already come up. I'm going to be completely honest. I didn't know what EOR was until about 6 or 7 years ago. And I've worked in HR since 1998. And I had set up offices in multiple different countries without even knowing that there was anybody out there that could do this for me. Wow. And then I discovered it really in my last 2 HR roles, and used EOR companies in both, and thought, good God, I wish I'd known this existed before. For anyone listening today who does not know what EOR PEO is, can you just give us a brief overview of what it actually means, what you do, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you're far from being alone in being an experienced HR person who didn't quickly find EOR. I have conversations every day with people who've worked in HR for years and have just come across EOR. So EOR is an employer of record. At a very high level, it's a compliant means of employing a person in a jurisdiction which is foreign to your company headquarters. So I suppose a typical scenario would be a recruiter or a hiring manager finds an individual in a foreign country where they've never previously hired. And a common starting point is somebody says, let's just take them on as a contractor. and then somebody in the HR department goes, well, hang on a minute, we can't actually do that because they're not a contractor. They're going to be an employee. Right, okay, so if they're an employee, how do we employ them? Okay, well, we could set up to do that ourselves. So we could do things like create an entity, set up a payroll, create an employment contract, have some benefits, do those kind of things that we need to have in place. What an employer of record does is already have all of those things in place. So there is no need for the employing business to go and set up all of those elements individually. So the employer of record becomes the legal employer, the employer on paper, but the individual worker is still doing work on behalf of their parent company, if you will, the end client. I think important distinctions to make is that we're not an umbrella service. So an employer of record doesn't do things with contractors. That's a contractor of record or a different kind of a service. And also we're not an agency. So we don't get involved in the day-to-day leadership of the individual. That sits with the end employer, as we call them.
Yeah, it's I mean, I've been through that whole process of actually setting up an entity. We did it in Dubai, and this is a pain in the backside compared with going the EOR route. We really didn't need to do that. So it's, yeah, I mean, and how long has the EOR industry been around? I mean, I know that Agility, you're a few years in now, aren't you? But we're up in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, so when I started doing things with EOR about 10 years ago, there were something like half a dozen companies that we would repeatedly come up against and hear in the marketplace. Now, estimates somewhere between 800 and 1,000 EOR companies around the world. So it's a huge increase. And of course, where COVID was terribly damaging for so many people and so many businesses, it was really a shot in the arm for remote work and therefore for the EOR industry. And I think that's why you've seen such a spike in the last few years.
Wow. Yeah, of course. I mean, there are so many organizations that do fully remote work now or hybrid work, and we'll have people based all over the place, that I guess that logic follows. So we've got amongst the panel today, we've got people that have covered organizations all around the world, and I've lived in the States and done HR in the States, and also covered a lot of European countries as well. And I picked on Germany and the US because I feel German employment law is fairly stringent. I don't know. I think probably the French might be a bit worse, but I put Germany and the US on kind of almost opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to employee rights. And the UK kind of sits in the middle, doesn't it, of some of the European countries and then the States. What would you say are some of the biggest day-to-day implications for HR when they're working across such vastly different jurisdictions? And Gary, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. So I worked with teams in Portugal and also Finland as well. And the biggest thing that came up for me is this point that people need to understand that HR has to translate what's different between the UK and whichever country is that they're working in. And that translation needs to be around risk. It needs to be around flexibility. And you really need to unpack and explain the fairness point. So, for example, if you work in Portugal, it's pretty standard as part of your employment contract to have a lunch stipend. So you get a budget for your lunch if you work as an employee in Portugal. And I remember the team in the German head office, and they were like, but why do they get this? And in the absence of someone walking through these cultural differences between different geographies, people fill the void with their own conclusions about why different countries get different benefits. And that's why I really think that HR on a day-to-day basis is responsible for this translation piece.
That's a good point. Alex, how about you? What are some of the day-to-day implications you've seen?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kirsty. So I think one of the real day-to-day points is that, again, kind of building on the US, Germany piece, is that I think that someone mentioned it earlier on, which is the working assumption that employment can end at will within the US. And then, on the other side, objectively within Germany, it's less, objectively within the US, it's less processed than it is within Germany. And so I think the working assumption is that, whilst laws are or can be polar opposites, actually I think dismissals are hard, irrespective of the countries that you are operating within. If you just use those two examples of US and Germany, I think the UK sits in between those, but actually not neatly. We have notice and we have fair process that the US does not, at least at a federal level. But we do have a far lighter, I guess, co-determination than what Germany would have. So I think what that means for us as HR professionals on a Thursday morning or a Thursday afternoon, depending on what time of day it is for you and where you're watching today, is that it does require the same level of attention to detail. And that means that the same management action carries a completely different level of risk dependent on the country. And so, a quick performance exit that's routine in Texas, as an example, could be a multi-month consultative and documented process in Germany. Now, I don't actually operate in Germany within my current organization, but I do operate in Japan, which is very similar in its approach. And so completely relatable. And so I think that it's really important that if the leaders who you are guiding as HR professionals, or maybe your leaders yourselves that are watching this, do not know the world in which you're operating in, you're, again, linking back to my original point about your home country, is that you'll act on instinct. And I think that instinct is shaped by wherever you happen to sit as an individual. And so I think the answer is, in part, is to never let yourself guess, or never let your managers guess, or your leaders. It's that the country decides the process, the manager follows that, and as HR professionals, we make and guide on the rules, not the expectations.
Yeah, that's a good point. Marion, what have you come across in terms of the day-to-day implications?
I mean, I think you know, it's sort of building on the at will piece. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And I think that coming from the UK and then having experienced HR in the Middle East and India and across Europe, I brought with me a mentality of best practice as opposed to just following what's the bare minimum, because at the end of the day, what we're doing, we're looking after people, right? And so we should have a human-centric process, and pretty questionable about some of the US processes, as with the other countries. There's other countries that have some very interesting processes as well, which are not specifically human either. But as I've told my teams here in the US repeatedly, once you've sat in an employment tribunal in the UK, you will do everything you can to never have that experience again. So you're always going to push the bar higher and higher. And so I've really brought that mentality with me. And I think that that's given a much better employee experience wherever I've been.
You know, I've never been. In 28 years, never been to a UK employment tribunal.
Same.
A Dutch one and a Swiss one, but not a UK one.
Yeah. No, I did a UK one many years ago, and I still have PTSD. So it's real. Yeah.
That's awful. I remember the Dutch one. The lawyers had to wear their proper gowns.
Wow.
Which was that was the one thing that stood out for me. I mean, I had no translator, so that all I could do was like comment on people's outfits because I didn't know what anyone was saying. But the Swiss one, I had a translator, and that was really bizarre because I had to give a statement. I was questioned, actually. I had to do quite a lot, and I understand French fairly well, but I can't form answers quick enough. So they'd say something and I'd be going, yep. And then the translator would start explaining. I'm like, yeah, I've already got that. I just need you to translate what I want to say back. It's such a bizarre process when you're working with a translator as well, because it kind of slows it down. We were in there for like 3 hours, but it was an interesting experience. But yeah, always work for organizations that would write a check rather than go to tribunals. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I've seen tribunal claims, but I've never actually got as far as tribunal. The company always settled before. Every company I ever worked for always settled before. When it comes to culture rather than compliance, where do you see the most friction? I know I talked a little bit about culture previously, but where do you see the kind of that doesn't always gel? Sam, let me ask you what you've seen there.
I think a lot of experience around differences in expectations of work-life balance, working hours, holidays. I remember I worked for a company where my employer was based in the US, and I asked my manager, I'm going on holiday, should I take my laptop with me? And he said, let me put it this way, if you were part of my US team, you wouldn't even be asking the question. And I think it's a really good sort of summary of the different expectations of, cultures where it's perfectly normal to go on holiday and switch off from work, and cultures where the expectation is you're not really away, let alone the number of days and hours. We have a lot of clients who are perhaps based in China, and they're working a 996 pattern, and it doesn't seem to matter what time I log on, somebody's on the end of an email, whatever hour of the day. So I think those working hours and days expectations
that's a good one.
Is a big difference.
Yeah. Alex, what have you seen from a cultural perspective?
Yeah, great question. So I think that the sharpest friction, I guess, in my experience, is feedback and authority. So how you tell someone they're underperforming and what the gap is between a manager and the employee is allowed to feel like. I think that's really important. So I guess in some of the markets we operate in, that very direct and critical feedback in front of others is quite normal, and in some cases even respected. In others, however, that same feedback may cause someone to lose face. Again, I can link on Japan here as an example. And then you've really damaged that working relationship without even realizing it. Even if the words are identical, the effect was opposite. And so I think that the same is also true for silence as well. So in one culture, you have an employee who does not push back, but actually agrees with you. In another, that same silence means they strongly disagree, but would never say that to a manager. And typically, whilst not wholly, you'll see this a lot within India. And I think if you read into that silence wrong, you'll make a decision on a consensus that actually doesn't exist. And so the friction, I think, is rarely policy. I think the friction is where HR/management, who exports their own cultural, I guess, reflexes and the way they assume that those words and connotations travel, because quite often they don't.
That's so true. I remember working for an organization once that had they prided themselves on having a culture of open challenge. But when you're working in jurisdictions where hierarchy is important, and I'm thinking of Asia Pacific, people aren't going to challenge someone who is their manager's manager. They're just not going to do it because that would be rude. It would be disrespectful. But the Brits and the Americans were like, yeah, you can do it. You can say what you want to them. And there was this, that was a real area of friction, was just, no, I'm not going to do that because he's my manager's manager. Like, no. And the other thing that always makes me laugh is that there are some cultures that are so direct in terms of how they respond to things. And if they disagree with something, they'll just blooming come out and say it. But the Brits will all go silent and then just bitch about it afterwards. But I remember the first time I ever worked in the Netherlands, it was so refreshing because people would just go, no, I don't agree with you. And no. I love the Dutch directness. That was always one of my favorite things, was the Dutch directness. Oh God, I could go on. The British inability to read a contract of employment. Oh my God, Brits, we turn to the last page, we sign it, and then when we had our notice in, we didn't realize we had a 6-month notice period, and then we questioned it. But you issue a contract of employment. Again, I'm going to use the Netherlands as an example. I have never issued a Dutch contract of employment and not had the person come back with at least 10 questions.
Wow. And
could I change this? And here is a suggestion. And would I be able to do? Brits literally just like sign it and give it back to you. I mean, those sorts of things they're just so interesting, aren't they? That it's just like, this is normal for us, but this is normal for us. And anyway, I'm doing it again. So who did I not get to? Marion, I didn't talk to you about cultural friction.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of really interesting anecdotes from when I lived in the Middle East. I worked for the largest retail franchisor in the Middle East, and so looked after a lot of really big brands, H&M, Victoria's Secret, Cheesecake Factory. So you can imagine you've got leadership teams from all over the world. It's a high expat-led business. And the difficult things of working, particularly in the Middle East and Islamic culture, Sharia law, were the things that were highly sensitive, like suicide and unmarried pregnancies. And, you know, I became a bit of an expert, for want of a better term, of being able to smuggle young ladies that had got themselves, you know, in the family way, shall we say, without being married. And these would typically be young females that were supporting their families back home, whether it be in the Philippines or other places. And if they were found to be pregnant and unmarried in these countries, well, that's not great. So there's a huge amount of personal conflict and sensitivity, and make sure that you're really trying to not break the law to an extent that you're going to get in trouble, but certainly try to use every tool in your toolbox to protect your humans. But those ones were tough. The suicide ones were tough because suicide is seen as illegal under Sharia law. And so if someone did not pass from it, they were likely to be arrested. So it was tough, and for me that was mentally and emotionally draining.
Yeah. God, that's so interesting, isn't it? Sam, from where you sit, what are some of the most common mistakes that companies make when they're looking to hire people internationally and they haven't thought it through properly? I'm sure that you have some kind of rescue situations, as well as companies coming to you proactively going, hey, we're thinking of doing that. I'm sure you must have some rescues.
Plenty of rescues, plenty of we're so far down the path and now we need to do something different. But usually where that comes from is, so by definition, what we do as an employer of record means that usually we're helping companies go into a country for the first time, and often with a very small number of employees. And one of the things that I see time and again is the company allowing the process to be led by the candidate that they've found. So they don't know anything about the country in which they're hiring, but they go, this person's local to the country, they will tell us how to do things. Of course, that individual's got different priorities. So again, referencing something I mentioned earlier, the first thing is always, hey, I'm happy to be a contractor. So that sounds nice from a company perspective. Well, we can wash our hands of every responsibility. Unfortunately, no, you can't. You might still have tax liabilities. What happens if you needed some IP protections in your employment contract that you now not going to have in such a robust way? What happens if you want to terminate this person? How do these things work? So I think that's if I could just sort of one thing that's painful time and again is allowing a process to be led by the individual you're employing. Don't do that.
That's it sounds straightforward, but I can imagine, especially if the organization has no knowledge of that country, and then you've got a candidate who's like, I know everything about it. You think, okay, well, that seems like that might work. That's so interesting. What do you think is a compliance or legal area that gets underestimated by HR professionals? And let me ask you first, Marion.
Oh, I mean, time off, PTO. I think that's a really interesting one. When I first moved to the US, and they're like, yeah, you've got 10 days PTO. And I'm like, wait, what? What? Yeah, I take that in the first quarter. Like, what's the rest of the year? Like, and again, that you talked about it earlier, the American culture of you work till you drop dead, and if you're not getting your emails when you're on vacation, and then they wonder why they have such high turnover rates and mental health issues and all of these things. And I think that we're becoming more educated now in the importance of time off. But we all know the rules of flexible PTO, unlimited leave. It's a pile of nonsense, right? Because you don't feel psychologically safe to take it. So I think really understanding, again, going back to what is the bare minimum, but what's your best practice? What's really going to look after your people? That's what's more important, not just ticking a box in the country that you happen to be operating in.
Yeah. So Alex, how about you from the legal or compliance underestimation?
Okay. It's got to be worker classification, I think, every time. People that are new to cross-border work, I think they typically focus on visible things, so pay, working hours, etc. I think those things really matter. But I think to an extent, they're also really well signposted as well, and that people respect them because they look like rules. But the classification, I think, is the real quiet one, so who is generally an employee, who's generally a contractor, and again, whether the country agrees with the label you've given them. In the US, it's W-2, 1099 as an example. In Japan, you have full-time, part-time, and then you have this wonderful piece in the middle, which is Hakan. And I could go through all the different ones in different countries, but we don't have that much time. But I think the trap is that you can run for a long time with someone classified one way, and that everything looks fine, I think. And then you have one single event, a single tax review, a single termination, a benefits claim that reclassifies them retrospectively. And now you're about taxes, you're about benefits, some maybe penalties, maybe you've broken the law. Maybe there's a currency like a sales nexus tax, and you have to go cross jurisdiction that you weren't planning for. And so the rules differ everywhere. So the test for a contractor, to link into a previous example, in one country is not necessarily a test in the next. So the model that is perfectly clean for one market can actually be quietly illegal. And I kind of emphasize that again, which is that that quietly illegal piece across the different borders. So I think my advice is probably really unglamorous, but it's make sure you're auditing your classifications before someone audits them for you. I think for us as professionals, it's the cheapest insurance in our function.
Quick question there, like quick show of hands. how many of you have ever discovered somebody in another jurisdiction that you didn't know about, and then you find out they've been there for like 15 years and everyone calls them a contractor, but they're part of the furniture? Yeah. So many times it's like, oh, no, you don't need to know about them. They're a contractor. I'm like, are they though? Quick question, because Marion, you brought up psychological safety. Somebody has put a question in the Q&A. Are Western nations more problematic with not creating psychological safety, or would you say that's a global thing?
Oh, global. It's a humankind thing. Kind being the strange word in that sentence, but yeah, it's a worldwide phenomenon. It plays out in different ways depending on the country and obviously the characteristics of that country. But that's where things like tools like Hofstede is really useful. Dimensions of culture, understanding your feminine versus masculine, your individual versus collectivist cultures, because it can help you then operate in a way that will support and enable psychological safety. But, I think that it's something that as all humans, regardless of where we live, we should be thinking about.
Interesting. Thank you. I mentioned remote and hybrid working earlier when I was talking to you, Sam, about, the rise in the number of EORs. Do you think it's made international HR more complex, or is it creating some useful flexibility?
Obviously, I suppose by the type of work that I do, I'm a big fan of remote working and hybrid working, and obviously I'm inclined to think that the benefits of the flexibility that offers outweigh the complexities. We tend to, as EORs, we start with a quite simple rule of thumb. We'll employ somebody in the country in which they're actually based and actually doing the work. And if situations get more complicated, then we'll bring in specialist advisors, tax advisors. Where we find that you do run into issues is that truly nomadic employee who's doing, a couple of months here, a month there, and then they're going to go and do 3 months somewhere else. Where you employ that person, that's certainly beyond me, Kirsty.
Yeah, that does sound tougher. How about the rest of the panel? Gary, have you seen it make things more complicated with the remote and hybrid working, or?
Yeah, I think, remote work gives companies access to talent, but without the clarity of that working arrangement, I think things start to unravel. And, we talked about psychological safety just now. I think one thing that is important for everyone to understand is you need to create leadership behaviors that work across all geographies, so that, it comes down to communication, it comes down to creating trust. It comes down to doing the right thing, because we've all worked with leaders who've hidden things under the carpet, and then you join the business and you're like, oh, we have 3 employees in Brazil who all have laptops. They're attending the company party and, they're in our HRIS system. How is this person a contractor? So I think you really need to make sure that you have the values and leadership behaviors in place so that leaders will do the right things, because it's not about us hand-holding. It's about putting the compliance foundation in place and then empowering people to do the right thing when we are not in the room with them.
Good point. Alex, how about you? Have you seen it make things more complicated, or has it made it more flexible?
Oh, crikey. Yeah, it's both. And I think pretending otherwise would probably be a mistake, at least on my part. I think that flexibility is a real USP, unique selling point. And we can hire the right person, wherever they are, instead of where the office is. And I think that I use EORs myself as a mechanism for doing just that. I think they're fantastic, but they also have their place as well. So for a group operating in 13 countries, clearly there are benefits to having both models, and indeed you'll probably find the same in your own businesses as well. And I think that generally widens the talent pool, which is a good thing, right? Because, post-COVID, we've all scrambled to the question that we used to take for granted, which is, where is this person actually employed, and can we get people and good people into our business? And so the flexibility and the complexity are actually part of the same coin. And you don't actually get one without the other, I believe. And so I think the way through isn't to ban one or the other. It's actually just to know really where your talent pool is as an organization, what sort of roles you're hiring for. So I had in a previous life hiring a data expert, and actually some of the best data people that I found in my experience either US based or middle of Europe, so Poland, Italy, for the highest level of coding skills, and using EORs to then flex once you've kind of chosen where you're going to have your assets. And I think that flexibility will surprise both you as a business, both in terms of being able to staff based on having office or remote workers, but also it's a liability. So it's the same thing. I think the only difference is really as professionals, whether we see it coming, and it's the visibility that's the key.
Got it. Marion, how about you?
Yeah, my research, my PhD research is actually the intersection of how companies approach remote hybrid return to office and how it impacts psychological safety, employee psychological safety. The inspiration was when Elon Musk bought Twitter, and Twitter being like, you know, Silicon Valley, cool, grab a beanbag, work whatever you like, turned overnight to your ass better be on a chair 40 hours a week. And if it's not, I will assume it's your resignation. And I think that, you know, to me, I went, how's that going to impact innovation in psychological safety? Because I know I wouldn't feel safe taking risks. And I think to the point that was made earlier on about the leadership and how that's executed throughout, there has to be that real focus on psychological safety, regardless of where people are, because if you don't, you are killing your innovation. You kill your innovation, you kill your productivity, you're not making money, right? So think about the ROI of all of that. So and ultimately, sneak preview, the outcome of my research, people don't want to be told where to work or when to work. They just want you to treat them like an adult. So I, you know, as long as I'm doing the job that you're paying me for and I'm giving you value, why should it matter if my butt is in that chair or this chair, you know? So I think that all of those things are unilateral, regardless of where you are in the world. But trust is the absolute core essential in all of it.
I love that. I mean, I do think there is a treating people like adults thread that runs through so much of what we do. I mean, I've always had a massive loathing of dress codes. I mean, I remember working, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent now. I remember working for one organization where there was like a 27-page presentation highlighting what the correct trouser length was. And it, honestly, I wish I'd kept it, because it looked like something from a 1980s Freeman's catalogue. It was so bad. And it was like
Freeman's.
Yeah, I'm going back. So what was the other one? K Noble or something like that.
John Moores. Remember John Moores?
You're all going to say that you weren't born in the 80s. But they literally was like 1 inch above the ankle bone was okay, but 2 inches above the ankle bone wasn't. And I remember looking at this, and we're only talking 2010. I'm not talking about the 90s. I remember looking at it and thinking, what? Wow. What the hell difference? Can you imagine? Fair enough, if someone turns up for work in a mankini, that's not particularly professional or pleasant for anybody. But as long as you're appropriately covered, blows my mind. But like being told where to be at work, when to be at work, what to wear to work, all of those sorts of things, it blows my mind. But we've all, I don't know, I think COVID was a wonderful thing for making people actually start to question it, because we'd all just accepted it without question our whole working lives. And then suddenly this virus happens and people are like, oh, hang on a minute. And I kind of love that a lot of it has stayed and that people are still questioning and people are not accepting automatically. I love that. And it's the same with the international movement piece as well. You're finding more people. I mean, look, I'm sat here in Spain. And I know I'm not an employee, but I was when I first moved overseas, and my company were like, yeah, you can go and work from Malta. That's fine. Did we set up a Maltese entity? No. But it was only for a couple of months. And to be fair, as a condition of my Maltese visa, I had to remain employed and taxpayer in my home country. But from a presence perspective, I don't know if that was the right way of doing things, but I wasn't doing sales or anything. I know that sometimes if you're doing sales, that can have an impact on whether you need to have an entity or not, and I wasn't. But anywho, before I ask the last question, which is going to be tips for people, Gary, you said right at the start that you had a horror story you wanted to share. So I'm really, just from a fun perspective, what is like the worst mess up you've each seen before?
I'll choose my words carefully, but I told you about the employees. The employees we discovered in South America who were actually contractors, right? And they were in our system. They were coming to our annual parties, and they had laptops. And my bottom line is this: that as soon as you get intentional about this topic of working across borders, you realize you need a budget for this. You cannot wing it, right? If you're going to be compliant, you need to put it down as part of your budgeting so that you can take care of it and be consistent all year round. And none of that was in place. And it led to a lot of very uncomfortable conversations with people that you can only go two ways, right? Either you're going to go the EOR route, which is something I actually explored, but it turned out my CEO did not want to pay for that option. So then the other option is, hey, after a certain amount of time, you've got to come back to the territory where the entity is. And all of that is avoidable for the employee experience. It doesn't need to happen. So learn from my difficult experience, and please set aside a budget and be compliant consistently so you can focus on the experience piece.
Alex, what is a nightmare that you've had to navigate?
Oh, blimey. In a previous life, it was through using an employer of record, but then also having a legal entity within the organization, within the business, in country. And that creates a dual classification risk. So it's just important that if you are either going down your own legal entity route or you're running an EOR off country, that you don't have both running at the same time, because that will cause you some pretty uncomfortable conversations with the local authorities.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Marion?
I alluded earlier on, I mentioned mental health. I did have one particular case where a foreign national had some mental illness. They'd gone off their meds. They kept disappearing. The police would pick them up, put them in an asylum, for want of a better word. That's how they called it locally. And then because they were sponsored by my company, ergo my responsibility, and after this happened 3 times, had to work with the Egyptian embassy and various other people on how to help them get out of the country. But again, that stigma around mental health made it very, very difficult. And instead of the family wanting to take this son home and embrace them, they shunned them. And so it's still, I'm still pretty scarred by that experience, because the way I work is, yes, law and everything's important, but it's the human, right? What's the right thing for this human being? The right thing for them was to be in a country where they could be taken care of, except their country didn't want them. So that was tough.
Something to add to the list of things that we didn't know we were going to have to deal with when we did our professional qualification.
We are the junk drawer. We are a catch-all for everything. Yep.
Oh my goodness. I mean, that is such a tough thing to have to try and navigate on so many different levels, and most of which we're not trained for. And yet we do it because we are amazing. My favorite international conversation that I ever had was when, and I worked for a very large US based company for a long time, and they were headquartered in Wichita, Kansas, and a lot of the US based employees hadn't ever left Kansas, let alone left the state. So it was quite an insular view. And I remember a lady from Wichita rang me once and she said, "Hey, Kirsty, just to let you know, we've offered a job to someone in Brussels. Can you do a contract?" And I remember going, well, no. Why not? And I said, well, I don't have a Belgian contract. And she said, well, can't you just put them on a UK contract? And I said, no. And she said, why not? And I went, well, I'm guessing they're going to need to pay Social Security in Belgium, and our pension plan and our medical are in the UK, and they're going to need Belgian ones. And she said, what's this Belgium thing? And I said, that's the country that Brussels is in. And she said, is it not in the UK?
Oh.
And you know when you're like on the phone, and I was literally like holding the phone out going, is this actually happening? And that's just one individual, but it became my kind of like, oh my goodness. And she said, I honestly thought it was just another state. And I said, we're small, but they're not states, they're separate countries. Yeah. And so I ended up being asked to go to Wichita, and I had to present to all of the business partners in the US. There's about 80 or 90 of them on international differences. And just, you know, I did a map of Europe, but I put it on top of a map of the States so that people could see, like, these are the individual countries. You know, Texas is bigger than France is one of my favorite lines that I used to use. Like, it's very difficult, I think, for when you come from a country the size of America to wrap your head around how different things are in Europe. And yes, there are state laws and federal laws in the States that are different, but in completely different countries, there's that huge difference as well. But that one always makes me smile, I have to say. So to finish up, if you could give our audience today one useful thing to take away, something that they can like go away and think about immediately, what would that be? And I'll ask Sam first.
So I like the analogy that if you are taking on an employee in a foreign country, treat it like you would a high value, important purchase in your personal life. So if you were booking the holiday of a lifetime for your family, you would think about the budget, you would think about, you would plan in advance, and you would, as Marion's alluded to, the people are important. You would think about what makes everybody involved happy. So I think those three things, with an international hire, budget, timeline, and consider everybody involved, is a pretty good takeaway.
Love that. Gary, what would you say?
I would say compliance is the baseline. The people experience is where the trust, engagement, and retention piece happen, and it's where trust and is won or lost, right? That's where it really happens. I would advise anybody who's watching this webinar today, go out and get yourself a copy of the book, The Culture Map by Erin Mayer, and remember that we as HR practitioners need to model for the rest of the business. Let's show the rest of the leaders in the business how to work across borders, because they're not going to figure it out on their own. It really does start and end with us. So please get the cultural nuances down and create the best experience you can for your team members.
I'm making a note of that book, and I'll put it in the description when I load this, because I've not heard of that before.
It's an amazing book.
Okay, cool. Marion, what would you advise people?
Yeah, I mean, building on what my colleagues have said here, you know, the academic in me is be aware of your own ethnocentric lens. We look at things through our own lens, and we, especially if we haven't traveled widely in the world, we don't necessarily have that point of reference. And I think that book sounds amazing. I'm going to get it too. I'm a big advocate for Hofstede's Dimensions of Culture. I think it's one of the most important pieces of research out there that helps you understand the differences in culture. And I think that if you have a natural curiosity and you can find a way to give yourself an immersion in that culture, whether you get to visit, whether you watch movies, whether you go to a restaurant, whatever it might be, but really be curious and observe, because it does help you, again, human to human, right? You're relating to other humans. You are not a cold entity. You are a human being, and you're relating to another human. So all of those things, I think, are just equally important.
Wonderful. And Alex, I'll finish up with you.
Thank you, Kirsty. To build on what my fabulous peers have said, it's that for every country that you operate in, name one person that owns the truth for that country. Maybe that's someone internal, maybe that's someone in your HR team, hopefully, or maybe that's an external partner, or indeed EOR partner. And it needs to be one person per country, because you need someone whose job it is to know the local law, to know, most importantly, the local customs and culture, and the local reality of that person and of that country. So when you are writing a sickness policy, you can really understand the context in which something's been written and how that might be interpreted. I think most cross-border mistakes, at least in my experience, were really because the rules were not known, and because at the time businesses or teams, or dare I say it myself, didn't make one person singly accountable for that country, and so everyone assumed that someone else was watching it. And so my piece of advice is to go back to your organisations, to draw that map out, or Excel spreadsheet would be the best thing. 13 countries, 30 countries, doesn't really matter, but just make sure that everyone that you operate in has a name next to it, because every country needs an owner, so you can stop being surprised. And I think in our incredible profession of HR, surprise is the only thing that really costs you.
Yes, that's very true. That's a good line to end on, actually. Thank you for that. This has been, I could go on for another hour, because I as you're talking, I've got all these questions, but we are out of time, unfortunately. But it is one of those topics that you could spend an awful lot of time talking about, because quite often as well, I think something will land on their plate and they'll have quite a short amount of time to try and work out what they need to do or turn it around. Because if a candidate has already been identified, the clock's already ticking. You've got to get an offer out to that person. And so I think in those situations now, I would always contact an EOR rather than trying to work it out for myself, which I've done in the past and was just painful. But thank you, all of you, for joining me today. Such a wealth of experience. This has been great fun. And I hope that those of you listening have found it useful. I will add the links to Hofstede Dimensions of Culture and the Erin Mayer book as well. And I will also add links to the LinkedIn profiles of this wonderful panel, so that you can connect with them and chat to them if you want to. So thank you, everybody, for joining me. This has been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirsty.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty.